He thought his life had ended with his wife's last breath, until he found 3 hungry boys digging through his trash, desperate for milk. He gave them food, and they gave him something to live for. The clatter behind the barn wasn't loud, but enough to stop Silas Boone mid-step. He'd lived on this land alone for 6 winters, and nothing stirred on this stretch of prairie that he didn't notice, especially not behind his barn, where the scraps from the kitchen got dumped twice a week. Silas moved quiet, boots sinking into the packed dirt as he turned the corner, expecting a raccoon or maybe a stray mutt. Instead, he froze. 3 boys. The smallest crouched closest to the pile, digging with fingers so bony they looked like twigs, pulling apart crusts of old bread and shoving them into his mouth like he hadn't eaten in days. The middle one held a dented tin cup under the edge of a souring milk bucket, waiting for slow drops to fall. The eldest stood rigid, as if sensing danger, his back to the barn wall and eyes sharp, dark, and wary. That one noticed Silas first. He didn't run, didn't blink, didn't even reach for the others. He just squared his narrow shoulders and stared up at the man in the wide hat and long coat, like he was ready to fight even if it'd break him in half. Silas didn't speak, not at first. His voice hadn't been used in a while for much beyond muttering to himself and praying out loud by his wife's headstone. The wind stirred, dragging the stench of old milk through the air. The middle boy gagged, dropped the tin. The youngest whimpered. "Where's your ma?" Silas finally asked. No answer. "Your pa?" Still silence. Then the oldest said, quiet but calm, "Gone." Silas glanced down. No shoes on the youngest, torn shirt on the middle, a deep purple bruise on the elder's forearm half hidden under a rolled sleeve. They weren't just lost, they were surviving. "I ain't here to hurt you," Silas added, softer now. "Name S. Silas Boone, this here's my land." "We're not stealing," the oldest said immediately. "You're digging through my garbage, son." A pause. "Then we're not very good at it." Silas snorted. Couldn't help it. First time a sound that wasn't a sigh or a grunt had left him in weeks. "What's your name?" Another pause, longer this time. Finally the boy said, "Lyle. That's Jonah," he nodded to the middle one, "and this is Toby." "How old are you, Lyle?" 12. "And your brothers?" "Jonah's 10, Toby's 6. 6, that explained the shaking. The way his cheeks were so hollow you could see the shape of every bone beneath. Silas exhaled and looked toward the house, then back at the boys. "You boys eaten anything today?" Toby nodded too fast. Jonah looked down. Lyle shook his head. "Come inside." "No. I ain't gonna hurt you. We don't go with strangers." Silas rubbed a hand across his jaw. "That your rule?" Lyle nodded. "It's a good one." Then he turned on his heel and walked toward the house, slow, deliberate. "I'll put out a kettle," he said over his shoulder, "if you change your mind." He left the door open. Didn't look back. Didn't have to. By the time he set the pot on the stove and pulled out 3 tin bowls, he heard the floorboards creak. Just one set of footsteps. The middle one, he guessed. But then another, softer, quicker. And then barely there, the smallest. They came in without a word. Lyle stayed standing by the door while Jonah hovered near the stove. Toby made a beeline for the warmth and curled up by the hearth, too tired to pretend he wasn't freezing. Silas didn't speak, just ladled broth into bowls and set them on the table, one by one. Jonah sat first. Then Toby, as soon as he saw food. Lyle waited. "You waiting for me to taste it first?" Silas asked. Lyle didn't answer. He sat but kept his eyes on Silas the whole time. They ate like wolves. No manners, no words, just desperate hunger in every bite. Silas watched, then reached across the table and slid his portion to Lyle. The boy hesitated, then handed it to Toby. "That said enough." You from here? Silas asked once bowls were scraped clean. No. Where you from? Lyle looked away. What happened to your folks? Gone. How long you been on your own? No answer. Too long, Silas muttered. You've been sleeping outside. Sometimes. In barns. When we can. Silas leaned back in his chair. Where were you last night? Under a bridge. Before that a shed. Before that. Lyle trailed off. Why here? Silas asked. Why my barn? Smelled like apples. They were rotten. Still apples. That night Silas gave them his bedroom and took the chair in the corner. He couldn't sleep. Not because the chair was hard. He slept harder places, but because of the quiet. The kind of quiet that wasn't peace, but loneliness. Until he heard it. A soft cry. Not loud, not panicked. Just weary. He stood and cracked the door. Toby sat on the edge of the bed, knees pulled up, head in his hands. Silas stepped closer. You all right, son? The boy shook his head. Nightmare. He nodded. Silas reached down, scooped him up without asking, and held him against his chest. The child clung to him, not like he was afraid of falling, but like he was afraid of letting go. Lyle stood across the room, watching. And for the first time, something in that hardened stare shifted. Just a little. The next day, Silas found Jonah kneeling by the fence, whispering something to the cows. The boy jumped when he saw him, then went right back to talking, like it was no big thing. You always talk to animals? Silas asked. Jonah shrugged. They listen. You talk to people? No. Silas laughed. Fair enough. He noticed then Jonah was barefoot. And the morning was cold. He didn't say anything, just went inside, pulled out the last pair of wool socks he had and left them by the door. Jonah found them. He didn't thank him, but Silas noticed he wore them the next day. Progress. On the third day it rained. Hard. The boys stayed inside, huddled around the stove, while Silas chopped wood in the yard. When he came back soaked, Lyle was standing at the door holding a towel. He didn't say anything. Just handed it to him. That night as Silas dried his boots, Lyle sat at the table fidgeting. We'll go in the morning, he said quietly. Silas looked up. No, you won't. You've helped enough. I ain't done. We're not your responsibility. Silas leaned forward. That a rule too? Lyle frowned. No, he whispered, that's just the truth. Silas stared at the boy a long moment. Well, he said finally, it ain't mine. Lyle blinked. Truth is, I ain't had a reason to get up in years, Silas said. Not since my Sarah passed. House went quiet, fields went cold, I stopped talking. You know what that feels like. Lyle nodded. I ain't letting you go back to that. 3 days later, Toby called him Papa by accident. Just once. But it changed everything. Silas didn't correct him. Didn't laugh. Just smiled and pulled the boy onto his lap. Lyle saw it. Didn't speak. Didn't cry. But when he turned away, he wiped his eyes. And for the first time in a long, long while, Silas Boone felt alive. The days didn't pass like days anymore. They moved like seasons, unrushed but undeniable, changing everything quietly while no one was looking. Silas Boone's ranch had been a graveyard of memories for nearly a decade, each room a tomb of what he had lost. But now, morning started with muffled giggles behind the old pantry door, the thud of tiny feet darting through the kitchen, and Jonah whispering facts about cows to Toby as if livestock were the most fascinating creatures on earth. It was different. And strange, and hard sometimes, but mostly it was good. Silas had kept the boys around at first because it felt like the right thing to do, But soon he stopped pretending that was the only reason. The truth was he needed them, just as much, if not more, than they needed him. And yet, not everyone in the nearby town of Sand Hollow saw it that way. It began with whispers at the general store. Silas only went once a week for flour, sugar, and occasional meat if his chickens didn't lay enough eggs. But that week, he brought Jonah with him, the boy wrapped in a coat 2 sizes too big, clutching a grocery list like it was the Constitution. "Found yourself a helper?" Maureen Liddell asked from behind the counter, her voice too sweet to be sincere. Silas nodded, "A smart one." Jonah stood tall, chin up, doing his best to look braver than he felt. Maureen's eyes lingered on him. "Doesn't look like he belongs to you." "He does now," Silas said plainly. That earned a longer stare. Maureen looked ready to ask another question, but Reverend Langford's daughter came through the door just then, saw Jonah, and flinched like she'd seen a coyote inside the store. "Is that the boy that was seen scrounging outside the old Benson mill last winter?" she asked sharply. Silas tensed. "Don't matter where he came from." "I heard he had brothers, that true?" "3 of 'em," Silas answered. The Reverend's daughter blinked. "And you took them all in?" Silas didn't respond. Jonah's hand slipped into his. That was all the answer he needed. Back home, Silas didn't mention the store, but something changed in the way Jonah moved around the ranch after that. He watched the road more often, sat by the window longer. Lyle noticed, too. That night, once the younger boys had gone to bed, Lyle stepped out onto the porch where Silas was sharpening an old axe. "You think they'll come for us?" he asked, voice quiet. "Who?" "Someone." Silas didn't look up. "You're not stolen." "That don't mean anything." Silas tested the blade with his thumb. "If they come, they'll have to go through me first." "You can't protect us forever." "I don't plan to. I plan to raise you right, so one day you won't need protecting." Lyle stared at him a moment. "You mean that?" "I do." For a while they just listened to the wind scrape across the dry brush. Then Lyle asked, "What if they try to take us anyway?" Silas met his eyes. "Then I fight." The next week brought more rain than usual. The roof above the kitchen leaked, and Toby slipped twice on the wet wood floor. Jonah had caught a cough, light at first, then more stubborn by nightfall. Silas sat up with him, spooning honey into warm water and laying a cloth over his forehead. "You ever had your own kids?" Jonah rasped. Silas hesitated. "No, my wife and I tried for years." "Did it make you sad?" Silas nodded. "It did." "Does it still?" He didn't answer right away. "Then not as much, not anymore." Jonah coughed. "Because of us." "Yeah," Silas said, "because of you." A few days later, Lyle asked for work. Real work. Not just sweeping or feeding chickens, he clarified. Something that matters. So Silas gave him the fence. 300 yards of warped posts and sagging rails that needed replacing, with nothing but a wheelbarrow full of tools and a rusted bucket of nails. "It's too much for one boy," Silas warned. Lyle just said, "Watch me." And work he did. Jonah helped when he wasn't coughing. Toby dragged small branches out of the way. Even Silas pitched in by midday, more impressed by Lyle's determination than he let on. By sunset, they had finished half the length. The next morning, Lyle rose before dawn to finish the rest alone. Silas watched from the porch, coffee in hand, his chest swelling with something that felt dangerously close to pride. That evening, while setting out supper, a rider appeared at the edge of the ranch. A stranger, clean-shaven, sharp-eyed, dressed too fine for the territory. Silas stepped off the porch as the man dismounted. "Evening," the man greeted. "Name S. Clyde Forrester, from the county office in Haven Ridge." Silas's shoulders stiffened. "I'm looking for 3 boys, orphan brothers. Names are Lyle, Jonah, and Toby Pike." Behind him, Silas heard the front door creak open. Footsteps. Toby's voice small and soft. Who's that? Silas didn't turn around. Go back inside. The man Forrester narrowed his eyes. That them. What's your business? Silas asked. I'm just following orders. Court's been asking about these boys for over a year. Last place they were spotted was a rail yard in Creighton, then your town, then here. What if I said they're not here? I'd ask if I could check. I'd say no. The man's gaze sharpened. Are you interfering with a legal search, Mr. Boone? Silas stepped forward. No, I'm protecting my family. There was a long silence. Then Forrester mounted his horse again. I'll be back with papers. Silas watched him ride off, then turned and saw all three boys watching from the doorway. Lyle's jaw was tight. Jonah was pale. And Toby clung to the doorframe, knuckles white. They didn't speak of it that night. But Silas sat up by the fire with his shotgun in his lap, just in case. When he finally dozed, he dreamed of Sarah. She didn't say anything, just smiled and laid a hand on his shoulder. When he woke, his heart was heavier, but his resolve stronger. 2 days passed without sign of Forrester. Lyle asked if they should run. Silas said no. Jonah asked if they'd have to go back. Silas said not while he was breathing. Toby asked if he could still call him Papa. Silas hugged him so tight the boy squeaked. Always, he said, always, son. But the storm didn't wait long. On the 5th day, the sound of hooves filled the air again, this time more than one. Silas stepped outside, heart pounding. 3 riders, 2 deputies, and Forrester in the middle, papers in hand. Lyle stood beside Silas. Jonah and Toby peered through the window. You gonna let them take us? Lyle whispered. No. Even if they say it's the law. Silas didn't answer. He didn't have to. Because he was already walking down the steps, shotgun in hand, not raised, not threatening, just steady. Forrester stopped his horse 10 feet away. I have court authorization, he said. I've got 3 boys inside who finally know what love is. This isn't about love, Mr. Boone. Silas stared. Then what good is it? Forrester hesitated. Look, I don't want trouble. Then you shouldn't have brought deputies. I'm trying to do my job. Then find another one. Behind him, the door opened again. This time all 3 boys came out. Toby ran down the steps and threw his arms around Silas's leg. Jonah followed, holding Lyle's hand. The image must have meant something, because one of the deputies shifted in his saddle. Forrester saw it, and cursed under his breath. I'll be back, he muttered. But this time he didn't sound so sure. That night the town of Sand Hollow heard what had happened. Some approved. Some didn't. But one person left a basket on Silas's porch. Bread, apples, warm milk. No note. Just kindness. And in the middle of that night, when the wind was still, and the fire glowed soft, and 3 boys lay curled in blankets that smelled of cedar and smoke, Silas sat in the dark and whispered a prayer. Not for help. Not for strength. Just for thanks. Because somehow, against everything, he'd found family. And somehow, that family had found him. The quiet didn't last. 3 mornings after the confrontation with Forrester and his deputies, Silas woke to the sound of hammering, not from the barn or any of the half-rotted fence lines he and Lyle had been working on, but from inside the house. He came downstairs still groggy, his shirt only half-buttoned. In the kitchen, he found Lyle standing on a chair, nailing a crooked piece of board across the bottom portion of the window. Storm shutters? Silas asked. Lyle didn't look at him, in case they come at night. Silas leaned against the doorway. They won't. You don't know that. No, Silas admitted, I don't. Lyle dropped the hammer on the table and exhaled hard, jaw clenched like a grown man. Silas saw the boy shaking and hated how familiar that kind of fear looked on someone so young. Let me worry about the law, Silas said gently. Your job is to be a kid, just for a little while longer. Lyle shook his head. I've never been just a kid, not since they died. Silas nodded, I know. Neither spoke for a long time. Then Lyle turned toward the pantry. We're almost out of flour. I'll go to town today. I'll go with you. Silas gave a look, questioning. Lyle met it with quiet determination. I want to show them I ain't afraid. Silas gave a small nod. All right then, let's go together. Sand Hollow had never been what anyone would call kind, but it had its moments. When they walked into the general store that morning, Jonah and Toby had begged to come along, but Silas kept them home. He didn't want the younger two anywhere near the eyes that had already been sharpening against them. Inside the store, Maureen Liddell paused her sweeping when she saw Lyle. Her expression didn't change, but she didn't smile either. Thought you'd be long gone by now, she said. Silas grabbed a sack of flour, didn't have plans to be. Lyle wandered to the back where the hard candies were kept in a glass jar, his fingers twitching toward it before pulling back. Maureen noticed, you planning to pay for that? Silas turned sharply. He hasn't touched it. Just asking, she said, a little too casually. Lyle stepped away from the jar, eyes lowered. Silas wanted to say something, but then the door jingled behind them and a new figure walked in. Sheriff Greeley. A hard man but fair, usually. He nodded toward Silas. Need a word outside. Silas handed Lyle the flour. Wait here. Outside, the sheriff kept his hands in his coat pockets. I don't like being put between neighbors, he started. You gonna tell me to give the boys up? Silas asked. No, the sheriff looked him in the eye. I'm gonna tell you the council in Haven Ridge sent Forrester back with a court date. Silas swallowed. How long? 4 days, you'll need to appear. Bring the boys. A judge'll decide if you get to keep M. Silas looked back toward the store window, where Lyle stood behind the glass, holding the sack of flour like it was a life preserver. Will the judge listen? Greeley shrugged. Depends if you talk straight. Silas squared his shoulders. I always do. They spent the next few days preparing, not just for the trip to Haven Ridge, but for the unspoken weight of everything it meant. Toby was too young to understand. He mostly followed Silas around the house, dragging a half-torn rag doll Jonah had sewn together out of old shirts. Jonah stayed close to Lyle, his cough still stubborn but improving. He didn't ask what the court was, but Silas could see the fear in his eyes. It came out in small ways, double-checking the locks, waking in the night to sit on the edge of Silas's bed, asking if they could keep planting the tomato seeds even if we gotta leave. Lyle didn't say much at all, until the night before they were due to ride out. He found Silas on the porch again, just like after the fence project. Only this time he was holding a worn envelope. Found it under the floorboards in the barn, Lyle said, handing it over. It's got your name on it. Silas took it and turned it over, Sarah's handwriting. His throat closed. He opened it slowly, fingers trembling. Inside was a letter, short but full of her. Silas, if you ever find this, it means I didn't get to tell you goodbye the way I should have. I'm sorry I couldn't give you children. I know you wanted them more than anything. But maybe one day someone else will come along, a boy who's lost more than he deserves to, a girl too scared to ask for help, maybe even a few of them. And maybe you'll take them in, not because you're desperate, but because you've got more love than you know what to do with. If that happens, if they come, don't let them go. Please. Love always, Sarah. Silas read it twice before folding it and placing it in his chest pocket. He looked at Lyle, eyes glassy. "Thank you." Lyle only nodded. Haven Ridge was 3 days by wagon, 2 by horse. Silas borrowed a buggy from a neighbor and packed bread, jerky, and enough blankets to keep the boys warm on the road. Lyle sat up front beside him. Jonah and Toby rode in back. They didn't speak much on the journey. Silas pointed out creeks and rock formations, tried to keep things light, but by the second night it was clear none of them were sleeping well. On the final morning, they crested a hill and saw the town laid out below, bigger than Sand Hollow, full of carriages and chimneys, a courthouse steeple rising above it all. Jonah gripped the buggy side. "That where the judge is?" Silas nodded. Toby whispered, "Do we have to live there now?" Silas looked back. "Not if I can help it." The courthouse smelled like old wood and ink. A clerk led them to a small room with 2 benches and a desk. Forrester was already there, flipping through documents. He didn't smile when they entered. "Where's the mother?" he asked. "There isn't one," Silas replied. Forrester clicked his tongue. "Even worse." The judge arrived 10 minutes later. She was older, steel gray hair, no nonsense. "All right," she said, "let's get started." Silas stood. The boys sat behind him, stiff-backed and wide-eyed. The hearing was quiet, civil but full of tension. Forrester laid out his case. 3 boys found scavenging, no legal guardian, placed themselves at risk. Silas countered with what they'd built together, what they'd overcome, the fence, the planting, the days spent healing. "You're a widower, Mr. Boone," the judge said, "and infertile." "Yes." "No legal experience raising children, no paperwork for adoption, no schooling." "We're working on it," Silas said. "Working on it isn't the same as completed." "I know, but they're not animals to be filed away. They're children, and they're mine even if it's not written on paper." The judge looked at the boys. Toby was crying. Jonah reached out and took his hand. Lyle stood. The judge raised an eyebrow. "You wish to speak?" "I do," Lyle said. She nodded. "Go ahead." Lyle stepped forward, voice shaking but steady. "We never had a real home, not until him. Never had someone who stayed, not until him. He taught us things, he listens. He treats us like we matter." He turned to Silas. "And I know he didn't ask for us, but maybe we were the answer to something he never got to ask for." The judge was quiet a long time. Then she asked, "Do you want to stay with Mr. Boone?" All 3 boys nodded. "Yes, ma'am," Lyle said. "I see," she said. "Then I'll make my decision." They waited outside for almost an hour. When the judge finally called them back in, everyone stood. She looked at Forrester. "At this time, I see no reason to remove the children from Mr. Boone's care. He will have 30 days to file proper guardianship papers, after which a follow-up hearing will determine custody." Silas breathed. Lyle's shoulders dropped. Jonah blinked like he didn't understand. But Toby shouted, "We get to stay." The judge smiled faintly. "For now." Toby ran to Silas and hugged his leg again. And this time, Silas let his tears fall freely. That night they camped beneath stars, halfway back to the ranch. The boys were already asleep, curled in a pile near the fire. Silas stared at the flames, Sarah's letter in his hand. He whispered into the quiet, "I didn't let them go." A wind passed softly over the camp. Like a promise kept. Silas Boone stood with his boots deep in the red dirt of his land, his coat unbuttoned, the wind lifting the edges. The sky overhead stretched pale and wide, morning breaking gentle and slow, but inside everything felt like it was speeding up. Not just time, but the weight of it all. He watched Lyle teaching Jonah how to coax the young calf back into the pen. Toby was nearby, chasing a moth with an old tin cup, giggling in circles, oblivious to the fact that the world had nearly taken everything from him. It had been a week since the judge's decision, and though the paperwork hadn't come through yet, and though the next hearing still loomed, Silas felt something new pressing at his chest: hope. And yet, with it came the kind of ache only a man who's lost before can understand. He'd been a husband once. He tried for years to be a father. Then death and silence had taken both titles away. But here they were, 3 boys calling his place home, and that meant he couldn't afford to falter. That afternoon, while Lyle was splitting logs and the younger 2 played near the creek, Silas rode into Sand Hollow alone. He needed more seed, and nails, and answers. He walked into the church before heading to the general store. Pastor Whitley stood at the pulpit, adjusting the cross above it with tired hands. He turned when he heard the door creak. "Well," the pastor said, brushing off his vestments, "I half expected the wind to bring you in today." Silas removed his hat, needed a word. Whitley nodded. "Sit, son." They sat in the pews where Silas had once held Sarah's hand, where they'd both prayed through every miscarriage, where he'd buried her name in the hymns just to feel close to her. "I've got 3 boys now," Silas said. Whitley smiled faintly. "I've heard. I don't know if I'm enough." "No one ever is," Whitley said, "but that's why God gives us each other." Silas leaned forward, elbows on knees. "They're scarred, Pastor. They've seen things I couldn't fix with 100 sermons. And yet they came to you. That must count for something." Silas looked down. "It does, it counts for everything." Whitley put a hand on his shoulder. "Then love them, every day, through their brokenness and your own." Silas swallowed hard. "That's what I'm afraid of." Whitley nodded. "Then you're already a father." Back at the ranch, Lyle was waiting on the porch when Silas returned. "You were gone a long time," the boy said. "Wasn't far. You okay?" Silas hesitated, just thinking. Lyle nodded. "Me too." Silas tied his horse and glanced over. "About what?" Lyle didn't answer right away. "About when it stops." "When what stops?" "Waiting for someone to take us away again." Silas sat beside him. "It stops now." Lyle shook his head. "That's what Mama said, and then she got sick, and they sent us to that place, and then she died." Silas looked straight ahead. "I'm not your mama." "I know. But I won't lie to you. I won't make promises I can't keep, and I won't ever give up on you." Lyle looked at him then, like maybe, just maybe, that was enough. The days that followed brought little pieces of normalcy. Meals were shared. A patch of corn was planted with far more effort than wisdom. Toby insisted on naming every chicken, even the ones that didn't make it through the cold snap. But one afternoon, a figure rode up from the north road. Dust clung to his coat like memory, and his hat was pulled low. Silas stepped off the porch slowly. "Mr. Boone?" the man asked. "I am." The rider dismounted. "Name S. Gentry. I'm from Haven Ridge. Judge sent me to start the adoption filing." Silas tensed, not because of Gentry's tone, but because of what it meant. Paper, bureaucracy, the kind of things that could undo what they were building with a single crossed box. Gentry followed Silas inside. Lyle stayed close, listening from the stairs. Gentry opened his satchel. "You've got some options here, but the truth is this ain't easy." "Nothing worth doing ever is," Silas said. Gentry pulled out the first form. "Now, to adopt 3 unrelated minors with no kin to sign off, you need to establish yourself as a long-term guardian first." "I thought I was already doing that." "You are, but the state doesn't move by heart. It moves by signatures." Silas exhaled. "What do I need to do?" "Letters from the pastor, school evaluations for the boys, proof of income, character witness from a non-family source. Then we file." Silas nodded slowly. "I'll do it." Gentry softened just a hair. Most folks wouldn't. I'm not most folks. That night Silas sat at the kitchen table writing the first letter to the judge. Toby was asleep by the fire, clutching his rag doll. Jonah had curled up under a quilt, and Lyle sat opposite him, arms crossed, eyes flicking across the paper. "You think this'll work?" Lyle asked. Silas looked up. "We'll make it work." Lyle hesitated, then reached into his pocket. He pulled out a folded piece of paper and slid it across the table. Silas opened it. It was a drawing, crude, childish, but clear. A house with smoke coming out the chimney. A man. 3 boys. And the word home scrawled underneath. Silas didn't say anything. He couldn't. He just reached across the table and put his hand over Lyle's. But peace doesn't last. The next morning, Pastor Whitley arrived in a panic. "They've filed a complaint," he said, breathless. Silas blinked. "Who?" "Town council. Said you're keeping orphans without lawful standing, that you're manipulating them." Silas felt like he'd been punched. "What does that mean?" "It means someone wants those boys taken." Silas clenched his jaw. "For what?" The pastor looked down. "Labor, ownership, it's not unheard of. Boys like them disappear." Lyle, who had been standing in the doorway, turned and ran before either man could stop him. Silas found him in the barn. He was sitting in the hayloft, knees pulled to his chest. "They're gonna take us," Lyle said, "aren't they?" Silas climbed up, sitting beside him. "They might try, but I won't let them." "You can't stop a judge." Silas looked at him. "I can fight, and if we have to leave Sand Hollow, we will. I'll find a place they won't look." Lyle looked down at his feet. "You'd leave everything." "I already have," Silas said. "The day I found you 3 by the barn, this land stopped being mine. It became yours." Lyle let that sit a moment. Then, voice shaking, he whispered, "Do you think Mama would have liked you?" Silas looked straight ahead. "I think she would have loved you enough to want someone who would stay. I hope I'm that someone." Lyle's voice cracked. "I think you are." And Silas put his arm around the boy and held him as the wind howled outside the walls. 3 days later, another man rode in. Not a judge. Not a sheriff. A stranger. He came with a paper marked with a seal, and a name Silas didn't recognize, Briggs. "I've been appointed interim guardian pending review," the man said. Silas stood in the doorway. Like the blazes you have." Briggs didn't flinch. "I'm taking the boys now." Lyle stepped onto the porch behind Silas. "You touch my brothers," he said, "and I'll scream loud enough for the whole town to hear." Briggs looked him over. "You're the oldest. I thought you'd know better." Lyle raised his chin. "I know what a coward looks like. You're him." Briggs stepped forward. Silas stepped between them. "You best get back on your horse," he said, "or you won't leave walking." Briggs hesitated. Something in Silas's eyes convinced him. He spat near the steps and mounted his horse. "This ain't over." Silas didn't move. "You're right, it's just starting." That night Lyle stayed awake. He watched the stars from the window, arms around Jonah and Toby as they slept beside him. He didn't speak. But he made a vow in silence. They would not be taken. Not while he still had breath in his chest. And not while Silas Boone stood between them and the dark. The morning came with the smell of smoke, not from firewood but something sharper, acrid, wrong. Silas Boone shot upright in bed, boots hitting the floor before his thoughts even caught up. He was halfway down the stairs when he heard the pounding on the door. 3 boys were huddled at the bottom, Toby clutching Jonah, Lyle already trying to shove a dresser in front of the door. "Back window," Silas ordered, "now." But before they could move, the door burst open. A figure stood in the sunlight, face half covered with a red scarf, clothes dusted with ash. Behind him, 2 more men were fanning out across the yard. Briggs hadn't given up. "You were warned," the man with the scarf said. "You've got something that doesn't belong to you." Silas stepped forward, blocking the stairs with his body. "They're not something, they're someone, and they're not yours." "You think the law cares about that," the man said. "You're a widower with no blood ties. 3 orphans ain't worth a slice of bread to most, but to the right buyer." Lyle stepped out behind Silas, fists clenched. "You're not taking us." The man tilted his head. "You think you're brave, boy." "I know I am." Silas took one slow step forward. "You come into my home again, and I won't just call the sheriff. I'll bury you so deep your name won't echo." The man smirked but backed up. "We'll see what the court says next week." With that, they rode off, hooves kicking dust into the air. Later that day, Pastor Whitley arrived with grim news. "The town council has decided to investigate further," he said, removing his hat as he stepped into the parlor. "They've called in a county representative. She'll be here Friday." Silas rubbed his jaw. "And if she don't like what she sees?" "She could order removal," Whitley said softly. "Effective immediately." The boys sat on the couch behind Silas. Even Toby, who barely understood what was going on, gripped his brother's hand tighter. "They've been through too much," Silas muttered. "I won't let some stranger pull them apart now." Whitley sighed. "Then we pray and we prepare." Friday came fast. The county representative's name was Eleanor Rigsby. She arrived in a stiff carriage, her frame equally stiff, spectacles perched on a pointed nose. Her voice was flat, her questions colder than the November breeze. She inspected the pantry, the bedrooms, the outhouse. She asked the boys questions, clinical, detached, recorded in a little black book. "Do you feel safe here?" she asked Jonah. He nodded. "Do you attend school?" Lyle answered, "We learn here. Pastor brings books every week." "Do you believe Mr. Boone is a suitable guardian?" Lyle's voice was steady. "He's the only father we've ever known." Eleanor's pen didn't pause. Silas tried to keep calm, but every second felt like a noose tightening around the house. At the end of the day, Eleanor closed her book and said only, "The judge will be informed of my findings." Then she left. Silas didn't sleep that night. None of them did. The following week, a letter arrived. It was sealed with the county crest, the ink smeared in places. Silas tore it open with shaking fingers. His hands stilled on the paper. Lyle watched from the doorway. "Well." Silas met his eyes. "They're scheduling a final hearing, 1 month from now. Until then, we keep them." Lyle exhaled. "And after?" Silas folded the paper. "After we fight." That same week, Lyle made a decision. He rode into town alone. It took most of his courage just to step into the courthouse. He asked for the clerk. He asked for a piece of paper. And he sat down on the steps, the whole town buzzing around him, and he wrote something no one had asked him to write. A letter to the judge. He wrote about the night their mother died. About how they'd been bounced from home to home, some worse than the streets. He wrote about the barn, the rotten apples, the first night they didn't go to bed hungry. He wrote about Silas. And at the end he wrote, "He never asked for us, but he stayed anyway. Please don't take him away." He folded it, handed it to the clerk, and walked home with fire in his chest. As the days passed, something strange began to happen. Neighbors, ones who'd once whispered behind curtains or looked away at the general store, began showing up. Mrs. Elgin brought fresh milk. Joseph Caldwell dropped off 2 sacks of flour. One by one, people started showing that they'd been watching, that they'd noticed the change in Silas, in the boys, in themselves. Even Sheriff Dunley came by one evening. "You've done good, Boone," he said. Don't let them tell you otherwise." Silas just nodded, too choked up to reply. Then, 3 days before the hearing, Silas found Lyle sitting on the porch steps in the dark. "You okay?" Silas asked. Lyle stared out over the land. "I wrote a letter." Silas sat beside him. "To who?" "The judge." Silas was quiet. "I didn't tell you because I didn't want you to stop me." "I wouldn't have." Lyle looked down. "I said what I needed to say. If it don't work, at least I tried." Silas nodded. "That's more than most men ever do." The day of the hearing came gray and cold. Rain threatened in the sky, but none fell. The courthouse was full. Whispers floated like dust, but Silas kept his head high, the boys at his side. When the judge entered, all rose. He was an old man with kind eyes and a heavy gavel. His voice was slow but clear. "Mr. Boone," he said, "this court has reviewed the report from the county representative. We've read the statements provided, including a letter from one Lyle Harper, age 12. Lyle straightened in his seat. The judge continued, "We've seen letters from townsfolk, from your pastor, from your doctor, from a neighbor who claims you saved his daughter during the blizzard 2 years ago." Silas blinked. He hadn't known about that one. "And we have considered the alternative, a state-run facility already at capacity, with fewer beds than children." He paused. "This court finds no reason to remove these children from Mr. Silas Boone's care. Effective immediately, guardianship is granted." Gasps, a few tears. Even the judge seemed moved. Silas didn't move. Toby whispered, "What does that mean?" Lyle answered, voice breaking, "It means we're staying." And Silas finally smiled. The celebration back at the ranch was small, just cornbread and stew, a few lanterns strung up in the barn. But to the boys, it was a festival. They danced, they laughed. Toby tried to teach Jonah how to waltz. Lyle didn't say much. He just stood at the edge of it all, watching, holding something inside. Later that night, when the barn was quiet and the stars were back, Lyle found Silas by the fence. He didn't say anything for a long while. Then, barely above a whisper, he said, "Papa." Silas turned slowly. Lyle's voice cracked. "Can I call you that?" Silas didn't answer. He just stepped forward and pulled the boy into his arms. It was answer enough. And above them, the wind carried nothing but peace. Snow didn't fall yet, but the nights were colder. Silas had never worried about firewood before. Now he stacked it twice as high. The boys were no longer just guests in his home, or even wards under his protection. They were his family. And when a man has a family, he feels the cold deeper because he knows it can reach someone else. He could hear their laughter from inside the barn while he chopped. Jonah had made a game out of tossing hay with Toby, while Lyle sat perched above them in the rafters, carving a piece of pine into something no one else had yet seen. There was warmth in their laughter, a music Silas had forgotten his house could hold. But peace, real peace, never lasts too long. It began with a letter nailed to the church door. Black ink, sharp handwriting, no name. "Guardianship may be legal, but it is not natural. This land belongs to blood. If you won't return what isn't yours, we'll come for it." Pastor Whitley found it first and rode straight to the ranch, his face grim and his hands shaking from more than just the wind. "They don't say who they are," the pastor muttered, sliding the letter across the table, "but I reckon you already know." Silas nodded. "Briggs, or someone like him. That kind never did take well to being told no, especially not by orphans and a man who wasn't one of them anymore." "What'll you do?" Whitley asked. Silas looked out the window. The boys were still playing, Jonah trying to balance on Toby's back while they both laughed like puppies. Lyle was carving with that same steady patience, the kind that had built more than one cabin in the West. "I'll do what a father does," Silas said. "I'll protect mine." He didn't wait for them to come knocking. Silas rode into town that evening, asked the sheriff to post a notice: no trespassing on the Boone Ranch. No soliciting, no business, no visitors unless named. It didn't stop them. That same night, someone left a dead coyote tied to his fence. Its mouth was stuffed with paper, rot runs from the roots. The boys didn't see it, he made sure of that. But Lyle noticed the hole in the fence the next morning. He noticed the new padlock on the barn door. He noticed Silas barely touched his food at breakfast. "Something's wrong," Lyle said, standing behind him on the porch. Silas exhaled through his nose. "Nothing you need to worry about." "I already am," the boy replied. Silas turned to look at him. Lyle wasn't a child anymore. Not really. Not after everything. The lines in his face had come from things boys shouldn't have to carry, and he wasn't done carrying them. "They want us gone, don't they?" Lyle asked. Silas gave the truth. "Yes." Lyle nodded. "Then they'll have to fight all of us." That night they locked every window and door. The boys slept in the same room, a makeshift mattress laid between the bunks, so none of them would wake alone. Silas stayed by the front door with a loaded rifle across his lap. The first sound came around midnight: hooves, then silence, then something clinking against the barn. A torch. Silas was off the porch before the second one landed. He fired once in the air and the riders fled, shadows lost to the trees. But the barn door was already smoking. He doused it before the flames took hold. By the time he returned, Lyle was standing on the porch, barefoot and shaking. "They're gonna burn us out," he whispered. "Not while I breathe." The next morning, Silas rode for the judge. He didn't ask for permission. He didn't wait for forms. He walked straight into the courthouse, slammed the soot-blackened torch onto the judge's desk and said, "I gave these boys my name. I gave them my land. I've got 3 graves out back that already took the rest of my heart. I won't bury them too." The judge stared at him. "What are you asking?" "Adoption, legal, permanent, full." "You know what that means, Boone. No going back." Silas's voice didn't crack. "There's been no going back since the day I found them." It took a week. A long, quiet, tense week. Then one envelope arrived, and inside was all they'd prayed for: 4 new birth certificates, new names typed neatly beside old ones. Jonah Boone. Toby Boone. Lyle Boone. Silas held the papers in shaking hands, then called the boys to the kitchen. Jonah thought they were in trouble. Toby brought a biscuit in each hand. Lyle sat with folded arms, already suspecting something. Silas passed each boy his certificate. And waited. Toby looked at the paper like it was a ticket to heaven. Jonah frowned. "Is this real?" Silas nodded. Jonah whispered, "You mean I get to stay here forever? You've been mine since the day I saw you chewing those rotten apples, son. This just makes it official." Lyle stared at his page. "You didn't have to do this." "I know. You could have sent us off, let the courts." "I know. You could have gotten someone younger, easier." Silas set his hand on the boy's shoulder. "But I got you." Lyle looked away, biting his lip hard. Toby climbed into Silas's lap. "Do we call you Daddy now?" Silas smiled. "If you want." Jonah was next. "Can we still sleep in the same room?" "Every night if you want." Lyle stood up. "I'll build us a new bunk," he said. "Stronger for all of us." And he did. The attacks didn't stop. But they changed. Someone poisoned the well. Silas dug a new one. Someone cut the line to the smokehouse. Lyle repaired it before the meat spoiled. Briggs sent letters, signed this time, threatening legal action, hinting at land disputes, claiming the boys were stolen. Silas took the papers to the sheriff, then to the judge. Nothing stuck. but it wore them down. Especially Jonah. One night he woke screaming, eyes wild, soaked in sweat. Silas rushed in, held him close. "I dreamed we were back in that shed," Jonah sobbed, "with the rats with no food, and you weren't there." "You're safe now," Silas whispered, rocking him. "You're safe." "Promise." "I promise." The next day, a package arrived. Wrapped in newspaper, left on the porch. Inside was a doll. Its face slashed. Its chest burned. No note. Just a message loud enough for any father to understand. Silas sat on the porch, holding it, long after the boys had gone to sleep. He didn't cry. He didn't shake. He just watched the horizon, waiting for whatever came next. He took the boys to town, sat them on benches outside the courtroom, and walked in alone. Briggs was already inside, dressed in black, slick hair, smug grin. The judge didn't smile. "You bring this case after these children have been lawfully adopted," he said. "I bring it because the adoption was based on lies," Briggs said smoothly. "They were coerced, manipulated. This man fed them, yes, but to keep them." The judge raised an eyebrow. "You have proof?" Briggs motioned. A door opened, and in stepped a thin, pale woman, the boys' aunt by blood, someone they hadn't seen in years. Lyle stood up staring. She didn't meet his eyes. Silas turned around, as if sensing it, and the whole courtroom seemed to freeze. Lyle didn't recognize her at first, but as the woman moved slowly to the front of the courtroom, standing beside Briggs, something in her gait, something in the crooked way she tucked her hand behind her back, lit a flame in his memory. He stood, mouth parted. "That's Aunt Faye," he whispered, just loud enough for Jonah and Toby to hear. Jonah's lips trembled. Toby didn't understand, but he leaned closer to his brothers, sensing something wasn't right. Inside the courtroom, Silas turned to look at the woman who'd just been called to testify against him. His expression didn't change, his hands didn't move, but his soul was a roaring storm. Aunt Faye took the stand, eyes cast low, fingers trembling around the hem of her dress. The judge nodded. "Ma'am, you understand the oath." She gave a weak nod. "Yes, Your Honor." "Then you may speak. What is your claim?" Her voice cracked. She swallowed. "I was the legal caretaker of the boys after their parents passed. Their mother was my sister." "And you willingly gave them to Mr. Boone?" She shook her head. "No, I was ill and there was no money. I placed them in a temporary home. When I came back, they were gone." Briggs leaned forward, pretending to comfort her. "They'd been taken," she whispered, "without my permission." Lyle bolted from his bench, fists clenched. "That's not true." The bailiff stepped in front of him. Silas didn't move. He simply looked back at Lyle and gave him the smallest, firmest nod. "Sit, trust me." Lyle sat down, shaking with rage. The judge looked to Silas. "Mr. Boone." Silas rose. "I found those boys in my orchard," he said clearly, "eating rotten fruit, half-starved, barefoot in snow. If this woman was their guardian, she'd abandon them, whether by choice or by circumstance. I didn't steal them. I saved them." "But you didn't report the find to authorities immediately," Briggs cut in. "You didn't seek formal guardianship until weeks later." "I was too busy keeping them alive." The judge raised a hand. "Let me ask you, Mr. Boone, did you know they had a surviving relative?" "No, Your Honor." "Did the children ever speak of her?" Silas looked to the bench where the boys sat. Jonah had tears in his eyes. Toby looked lost. Lyle stared hard at the floor. "They mentioned someone once," Silas said. "A woman who told them she'd be back, but they waited for weeks. She never came." He faced Faye. "You didn't come." "I was sick," she said, her voice breaking. "I had no one to help me." "Neither did they." Silence fell. The judge exhaled. I'll need a recess before making my decision. Outside the courtroom, the wind whipped hard. The boys gathered around Silas. Lyle wouldn't stop pacing. Jonah kept glancing back at the door as if afraid Aunt Faye might return and take them by force. Toby asked the same question over and over. Do we still get to stay? Silas knelt before them. I don't know what the judge will decide, he said honestly. But I know what's true. You're my sons, in every way that matters. Lyle looked at him. Even if they take us, they won't take you from my heart. But if they do, they won't. The judge returned to the bench half an hour later. All rose. Silas didn't breathe. The judge cleared his throat. I've reviewed the adoption records. I've reviewed the testimony. And I've considered the nature of family, not just by blood, but by choice, by action, and by love. He looked directly at Briggs. You don't want these boys. You want land. You want to win. He looked at Faye. You may have meant well, but the court can't erase what happened. You weren't there when they needed you. And finally, he turned to Silas. Mr. Boone, you gave these children what few men would risk giving. Your home, your name, your future. The judge lifted the gavel. I see no reason to overturn the adoption. Case dismissed. The gavel struck once. It echoed like thunder in Silas's chest. Jonah jumped from his bench and ran into Silas's arms. Toby followed, clinging to his leg. Lyle walked slower, holding himself back until he reached the porch outside, where he let the first tears fall silently. They were free. They were safe. They were Boone's. But not everyone celebrated. Briggs didn't speak to Faye as they left the courthouse. He simply stepped into a waiting carriage and rode off, face dark, jaw locked. He wasn't finished. And Silas knew it. That night the ranch was quiet, too quiet. Jonah wouldn't sleep unless Silas sat in the room. Lyle kept a knife under his pillow. Toby curled up next to Silas in the armchair and asked over and over if the judge was stronger than the bad men. Silas held him close. Yes, he said, but even if he were, I'd fight them myself. 3 days passed without trouble. Then came the shot. Silas was in the barn, hammering in a new beam for the chicken coop. The boys were in the house. A crack split the silence, sharp, too close. Silas dropped the hammer and ran. The bullet had struck the porch, inches from where Jonah had been sitting, reading out loud to his brothers. He was okay. They were all okay. But the message was clear. This was war. Silas moved the boys to the cellar. He reinforced every door. He taught Lyle how to use the rifle, not to shoot, but to clean, to hold, to be ready. He didn't sleep. He didn't leave the house unless he had to. And still, something kept whispering to him in the dark. They won't stop until they take something from you. Then one morning, he found tracks near the back fence. Fresh. Boots, hooves, at least 3 men. They were watching. Waiting. He couldn't run. He wouldn't. But he could prepare. He sent a letter to Pastor Whitley, another to the sheriff, one more to the judge. They came. With townsfolk. With supplies. With hands and hammers and nails. They fortified the ranch. They posted watch. They prayed over the doors. And one night Silas walked into the boys' room, found Lyle wide awake. I'm sorry, Silas said. For what? For all of this, for not protecting you sooner. You did, Lyle whispered. You always have. Silas sat on the edge of the bed. I used to ask God why he didn't give me sons. He looked down at Lyle. I don't ask that anymore. Lyle didn't cry, but his hand reached out and gripped Silas's sleeve tight. Toby stirred in his sleep, rolled over, mumbled, "Daddy." Silas smiled. "I'm right here." But the storm hadn't passed yet, because in the trees beyond the fence, a match was struck. A whisper shared. A rifle lifted. And vengeance took aim. The shot rang out before dawn. Silas was up already, sitting on the porch with the rifle across his knees, eyes bleary from another sleepless night. He saw the flash in the trees before he heard the report, a crack through the sky that ripped the quiet apart like a torn seam. The bullet hit the porch beam inches from his head. Splinters flew. Silas dropped to the ground and rolled behind the water barrel, instinct taking over. He didn't return fire, he didn't need to. A second shot followed, but it went wide. The shooter wasn't aiming to kill. He was taunting. For family. For love reborn in the ashes. They didn't share his blood. But they were his sons. Forever. And nothing, no judge, no gun, no fire could take them away.